I guess I just want to bring it up first and foremost to everyone that, this is an opportunity just to reaffirm our commitment to the safety and well-being of our student athletes, our staff, and the community at large. 5 years ago, we established 11 guiding principles. One of them, the very first one, is student athletes first and foremost. So that's the thing in the department. That's a lens that we look at as we make every decision, whether it was pre-COVID or the current status that we're in right now with, battling a global pandemic. So that's where we're at. It's been challenging. I know all of you have been experiencing things in your own personal lives and professional lives as we try and move through this, but we've built some really sound protocols in place to try and manage as best as we can in this very fluid and uncertain environment. It began 5 months ago when we put together a weekly meeting with our head coaches to update them on protocols and procedures that we were putting in place as we were kind of building these systems. And for each of the sports that we've invited back on campus, there's been a return to campus plan that they put together that's been reviewed by the university's pandemic preparedness group. So approvals are made by that committee before they can return and even before they can step into the next level of team activities. So at this point, most of our teams have been in voluntary workouts. The fall sports plus men and women's basketball, which is obviously a hybrid because they start in November. And that operating protocol has included an intake PCR test we've done in partnership with UC Health. They come and set up a site here on campus, as we've discussed before. It's a nasal pharyngeal swab. Those results are usually reported to us. Starting back in June, we were getting close to 24 hours or less turnaround time. Now it's extended out a little bit. I think that's just, an indication of, some of the increased viral spread around the area and, just the movement in those labs to try and get those back. So the next test, the test that we did yesterday, we would expect back within 72 hours. So we're hopeful that we'll have results by Wednesday or Thursday latest. Our operating protocols also include a lot of discussion about the things that we can do personally to mitigate viral spread. So that's the physical distancing pieces, that's the mask wearing pieces, and that's been a challenge, I think, for some, to adapt to those new social norms. We've been working really hard to communicate that into our student athlete population and also to our staff. And all these best practices, all these policies have been built around the directives that we've received from public health authorities, starting with the CDC, the state, public health, and Larimer County, and then our own people here on campus. So it's been a very diligent process. And, I think positive tests, in my opinion, are affirmations that we're being successful with our protocols. I don't view them as failures. We're interested in detecting viral spread. We want to identify it, isolate it, and protect as many people as possible. So, we did have a creeping up in our positives, so that was what necessitated the pause for football last Wednesday.
As a follow-up, what protocols are in place after a positive test, including the contact tracing, and who manages contact tracing?
Yeah, so everything is managed through independent medical advisement. That's the contact tracing and quarantine decisions. So in our case here on campus, that's CSU's public health authorities. They make all those decisions independent of anything that we would be doing within athletics. We follow their directives. All the quarantine decisions are at their direction. They do the contact tracing. So they're informed of a positive. They're given the contact information of that student in most of our cases, and then they are, they go about doing their job. And I would assume that I think Lori Lynn is on the call, so she's welcome to jump in at any point too. But I would imagine that contact tracing is in the form of an interview to ask them who they may have interacted with recently. A contact is defined by if you're present with someone that is COVID positive without a mask and you're less than 6 feet apart for greater than 15 minutes, that's what would record a positive. So, there's certainly occasions where if people are distanced, they're in a mask, they've been exposed for less than 15 minutes to that person that may be a carrier of COVID-19, then they would not be asked to quarantine or self-isolate. I think one of the challenges too I know for a lot of our students has been just what they view as a lack of transparency and communication. But like in so many cases, whether it be FERPA, but in this case HIPAA, we're prohibited by law from sharing anyone who's positive, and so the contact tracers are able to share some level of information, but I think that seems to be a lot of cases the obstacle for some students in understanding just we can't be as open as they might like us to be, and all the test results are reported to Larimer County Public Health, so there's never been an occasion obviously that we've been aware of a positive that hasn't been reported to the appropriate health authorities.
Terry?
Terry, make sure you unmute your mic as well.
What's the state of the Mountain West Conference schedule and your schedule, and what do you expect the procedure to be, their timetable?
Yeah, like all things fluid, we do 2 weekly meetings with the athletic directors within the Mountain West. So that's an open dialogue amongst myself and my peers. It's a conversation guided by the conference office staff. And, as things have developed around the country with other conferences making decisions to go conference only or a conference schedule +1 model, that obviously has had impacts for us. And in our case here at CSU, we've lost 3 of our 4 non-conference games. So Terry, we're in conversations right now. We had a meeting yesterday afternoon. We're going to advance some recommendations to our presidents. I believe the next time that they huddle, that's the board of directors of the Mountain West Conference, which is our presidents, will be on Wednesday. And so I would expect some decisions related to how we may be approaching the scheduling for the 2020 football season based on the impacts that we've seen from other conferences' decisions.
In your position, is it still your view that the ideal is, or the hope is, to play the full 8-game conference schedule and maybe fill in a bit with a couple around that?
I think so, Terry. We feel pretty confident amongst our peer group that, we're all doing everything we can to mitigate viral spread. We tried to tell that story to the autonomous 5 schools. Obviously, everyone at this point in time is focused on best outcomes for their leagues and making their decisions. But in every case, everyone's putting student athlete health and well-being first and foremost. And in the case of the Pac-12 decision, I think I've mentioned this before. Rick was fully aware, that is the AD at CU, that we were approaching every testing protocol that they were planning to do while in season.
Kevin?
Joe, obviously, with the rise in positives, during workouts here, is still happening under some, decent conditions, before all the students return to campus and everything. And just how practical or confident are you that you can actually get through a season with, all that potential contact, not just in athletics, but just outside when school is back in session?
Yeah, Kevin, therein lies the challenge. We know that, this virus moves in the directions that it wants to. We've put some extraordinary precautions in place, I think, on our campus. Our coaches have been tremendous partners in that effort. In the case of football, Coach Dazio has kept all the students outside, so everything that they've done to date has been on our stadium field or the practice field or lifting on the concourse. The locker rooms haven't been opened up. All meals are grab and go. This pause was really in some ways necessitated because as the contact tracing looked at the situation, they couldn't quite identify where the spread may have occurred. Our first few positives early on was tied back to a lot of social decisions that students had made. So, it comes from every direction. That's why, we've been really diligent about trying to inform everyone of best practices, getting them to adhere to those social norms. We've worked hard to make voices outside of athletics be present in that dialogue with, people from student affairs. Blanche Hughes is a strong proponent of, good, healthy decisions on our campus as the VP for Student Affairs, and she's someone that our students look up to. So, Blanche has been a part of that dialogue. We brought in outside health experts to coach kids through, all the sound things that they can do to hopefully protect themselves and protect others. And that's been a reoccurring, consistent message that we've been, informing our students of at every turn. So it's going to be the challenge. And our students, they have, 10 to 20 probably strong, meaningful relationships with staffers and coaches, and they're able to, consult those relationships with any of their concerns. And, every other student on campus doesn't have the benefit of kind of living in this real sticky environment where there's a lot of people arrayed around them that are paying attention and trying to help them develop through this experience.
Mike?
Joe, you touched on this a little bit, but have you received any feedback from the student athletes on testing or health concerns throughout all this?
We have a little bit. We always try and keep that dialogue open. We've got, I think, strong conduits with our Student Athlete Advisory Council. As I mentioned before, our students have meaningful relationships with a lot of staffers in athletics and people outside the department. We always try and triangulate that information to understand kind of the themes of questions that students might have, and we try and address those. But certainly if a student approaches us on an individual level, we're going to be responsive to whatever their concerns are and address those things immediately.
And has this outbreak, really this recent one, kind of helped prepare athletics for when students do arrive on campus?
I don't know how does it help? Yes. Is all this going to be the absolute answer that gets us to the point where we can navigate through, an academic year and a fall sports schedule and a winter and spring sports schedule? Those are all things yet to be determined. And, I've said it a couple times in my remarks. The two operative words always seem to be, uncertainty and fluid. And that's what I feel we're in right now too. But, Mike, I'm really, enthused by the way our planning and protocols have worked. We put football in a pause moment. I think that was a responsive measure. That was a voluntary decision on the part of the athletic department. We do it in consultation and collaboration with multiple resources. Our pandemic preparedness committee is instrumental in helping every unit on campus return, and they've been tremendous partners in the effort for us. So we've done, I think, in an uncertain and fluid environment, I think we've done a pretty sound job of doing our very best to protect our students. And when we decided to pause football, we'd always planned there would be kind of the next step as we transition into more intensive workouts, a full PCR test. So it aligned, real logically with the pause in football to do that on Monday. And we've tested yesterday 150 students. As was mentioned, it was also some intake testing for our cross-country team.
Terry?
Joe, you're a student, an observer of the national scene. You're seeing the NHL and NBA operate under bubbles that are working okay so far, but you're seeing that Major League Baseball without a bubble is having problems. to what extent can you attempt to emulate a bubble in your setting, or can you even try? Is there any hope in that regard?
Terry, I think that's the great differentiator between what we do and what the next level of professional sports do. The participants in intercollegiate athletics are students. They have lives outside of intercollegiate athletics. They have friendships, relationships, academic obligations, part-time jobs. It would not be a realistic expectation for an intercollegiate athletic student athlete, Division I, II, or III level, to try and live in a bubble for a year. It just isn't possible. That's not what we've attempted to do. We're trying to develop protocols and procedures that align with who we are. But therein lies the great challenge, and I think that's what's going to be the struggle. Part of this has to be an understanding that there will be positives, right? And we're dealing with an age demographic that hopefully, in almost every case of possible infection, that they're going to move through this in a way that there's no lasting impacts. Obviously, I say that when I hear everything that everyone else hears on what we know about COVID-19, and which isn't much but grows every day. So I think as you've seen schools make the decision to delay starts, I think that's an opportunity to put more runway out in front of us to hopefully get to a point where there's point of care testing, where you're not waiting for 24, 48, or 72 hours. There's been discussion and talk about the testing technologies evolving and developing to the point where it can be point of care, where you'll know in 15 minutes and less intrusive than a nasal pharyngeal swab. So we're doing what everyone else in society is trying to do, and we're trying to manage this to the best of our ability. We're trying to move back to some level of normalcy, but we also understand that there's going to be setbacks and impacts that we can't anticipate, and we're fully ready to adjust to whatever those things are, because as I said at the start of this, our students' health and well-being is the number one priority for us.
Well, in line with that, you alluded to this in response to Mike's question too, but the Pac-12 Manifesto put out by the players, your reaction to that, and what kind of assurances have you given in relating to the players and the student athletes about all of this?
Yeah, that's been an interesting development over the weekend. I think in so many ways we're doing everything that students, or rather the Pac-12 students, are asking, with the exception of the revenue sharing. It's never been a question in my 25-year career that the health and well-being of a student athlete isn't the first thing that we think about. That maps over COVID-19 and what we're trying to do and accomplish. So it's interesting. I haven't heard any of our students say anything directly about interest in We Are United. I watch sometimes some of the likes and retweets, amongst the roster members that follow me and I follow them. It's an area of interest. I'd be happy to discuss it with any of our students. We live in a space where we aren't financed. Prior to COVID-19, obviously, we weren't a part of that group of autonomous 5, Power 5 that had the advantage of a very lucrative TV contract. We live in a space where if we're gonna be successful at the intercollegiate athletic enterprise, we have to do a blend of direct institutional support and self-generated revenues. So our business model supports certain things, but probably couldn't support many of the things that those students in the Pac-12 are asking for.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks for doing this.
You bet.
Kevin?
Sort of along those lines, have you had any players or athletes opt out or discuss opting out?
Haven't yet, Kevin. We've talked, last few days that, if a student were to approach us, we would support that decision. without exception, would like to try and understand what their concerns are, but ultimately, if they arrived at a decision themselves or with their family advisement that they did not want to participate, we would support that. We would continue to support their scholarship. You've seen some developments at Washington State. I can't fault their decision. If a student says that they don't feel comfortable participating in team activities, that probably means everything. I don't know how you can parse. It's a very interwoven experience. So it's not really developed as a menu or that you shop off of or order off of. So if a student makes that decision, I think they have to understand that they're for a year they're putting a pause on intercollegiate athletic activities in every form. In our situation, obviously we would stay engaged with academic support, but I think for the other pieces, it would be difficult to find a way to see that align with their decision and what we're trying to do as it relates to protecting the overall team.
Hart.
Hi, Joe. Thanks so much for making yourself available to us today. Since actually right at the beginning of this conference, CSBN reported an update that the Sun Belt Conference is looking to have their football schedule include 8 conference games and up to 4 non-league games. I know you mentioned earlier you're having a meeting this week with the rest of the Mountain West, but right now, how confident are you that you'll be able to keep that game versus the University of Northern Colorado, since it's in such close proximity to where y'all are?
Yeah, well, similar to the situation with the Pac-12 decision, it would make sense for us, as long as UNC is following the same protocols we are for testing. That seems to be an important piece that that the NCAA and other healthcare advisors have said would be important. So right now, they're on the schedule. We're planning to play September 19th, and hopefully they are at a point where they can play. I may have mentioned this before, but we've been working with CU, Air Force, and UNC and the 10 RMAC schools just to kind of develop the plan, some best practice guidelines for hosting fans in venue. So we've been in conversation with all those schools, including UNC. So I know it's been a hard road for all of us, and we're still a ways from actually playing games. So there's the ground can shift underneath us for sure.
Thank you so much.
Eric.
Yeah, hey Joe, again, thanks for doing this for everybody. This is Eric Christensen at CBS4. You talked about the challenges of student athletes at the collegiate level living in a bubble, and we know when kids come back, that just increases that challenge. I'm just curious, how likely do you think it is that a college football season starts here at the end of September and actually finishes on time? Because what we've seen in baseball and other sports, it just seems a little bit like a pipe dream. I'm interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't call it a pipe dream yet. Will it feel like fits and starts? I think absolutely. Will there be disruption? Without question. Will there be weeks in which a team simply can't go? I think that's a very not likely scenario. We'll see. I mean, it's a challenge, obviously. I think at this point, we're on our feet, and we're trying to advance and make steps towards a return to fall sports. It's not just football. We've got volleyball and cross country and non-traditional seasons with other programs that occur in the fall. Basketballs that are supposed to start in November. Our students are wired to want to play. I think for the most part they want to have an experience. They don't want to put a pause on a year, and I think it's our obligation to help try and clear the way to make that possible. And at a point in time in the future, if it's determined that we just simply can't go, then we'll stand down and adjust to that new information and try and create the best experience for our students to make sure that they have a great academic experience, some level of social experience, and that we get them positioned for future practice and competition if we simply just have to dial it down.
Hart had one more.
Sorry
Hart,
about
make sure
that.
you unmute. There you go.
Yeah. So obviously, with news, coming from across professional outlets, Las Vegas said they won't be hosting fans in their stadium for the NFL season. I know there's been discussion about how to best safely have fans in the building. What with the concept of not having fans at all, has that been discussed at this point in any sort of length, or has it just been talked about as a possibility?
Everything has been discussed. Each variation on the kind of the spectrum, fans to full capacity. We've invested quite a bit of planning into a 50% scenario and a 25% scenario. Obviously, no fans, that's pretty easy to plan for. So we haven't spent a whole lot of time contemplating that option. If we reach that point, I don't know. I think at that point, is the experience what we want to try and create for our students, and that's a pretty big question for those sports that that have a spectator following, and even those sports, for women's soccer, in our case, when we host a match, there's an engaged fan base that supports our team, and that contributes to what the experience is for our students. So I have concern and apprehension if we end up at a point in which we aren't hosting fans, that depreciates the experience to the point in which, is it really what our students are looking for? And that's a question we'll have to ask of them and ourselves.
Thank you.
And if you have any questions, just use your raise your hand function. I don't have any right now. Terry?
It's coming. Joe, just in general, what would you say to CSU alumni, fans, even students about sticking with you through all of this and just the environment now?
What's certainly consistent about this is that it's universal. I'm not numb to the thought that people have been significantly impacted in their ability to earn money and a living and support their families. So it's going to be an extremely challenging time for everyone, including us. I mean, our message to our fans, which has already started, has been, we want to do our very best to address your needs, but we also want you to keep the interest and needs of CSU athletics at the forefront as well. We have 380 student athletes. The grant and aid encumbrance for those 380 student athletes is $9 million a year. We move that money to the institution every year. It's in our budget. So obviously in a challenged financial year, everything is a little bit precarious and at risk. We employ 140 people in our department, highly talented people who care about the student athlete experience, who care about each other. And obviously, to this point in time, thankfully the university has been able to keep everyone in place, but the headwinds, everyone can feel the headwinds as we go into, the full academic year. The operating expenses are something we can manage. I think we've proven that to ourselves that, we can dial things down there and really kind of control expenses on that side. But what's left? What's left is people that we care deeply about, students and staff. And that's where the hard decisions may end up happening for us. But, we're trying to develop strategies where we can nail the hatches down if we need to. And from the very onset of this, the conversations I've had with coaches and staff is that we just need to figure out a way to get to the other side. Whether we participate in practice or competition this year, we have to have a mindset of we've got to figure out a way to move to the other side of this, to the point in time where, you know, we can feel really comfortable gathering people in place, because that's part of our mission. You know, we work hard to connect community to campus, and right now, COVID-19 is not a willing partner in that process.
Have you crunched any further numbers on the possible impact of not playing football this year, and whether it would be catastrophic, problematic? And you alluded to it a little bit in that previous response.
Yeah, you know, we run two separate financial entities, one that fences all the revenues associated with football and all the expenses associated with the stadium. And then we have another P&L that is the athletic department itself. You know, I mentioned this in a previous call, I believe, or maybe it was when I was on camera with Brian Roth, but the university has worked through a plan to help us manage debt service and help the rest of the institution manage debt service in this upcoming year by a practice that they've referred to as scoop and toss, where we'll be able to take the majority, not all, but the majority of our debt service that would be due on the stadium project for this year and move it into future years. So that's been a really positive strategy for us, because about 70% of the stadium P&L is debt service. So that moves, you know, a big portion of that off of this year's revenue and expense obligations. So that's a great strategy for us. You know, getting the academic year launched is important to every unit of campus, including athletics. You know, we've been provided direct institutional support and student fees that cover about half of our budget. You know, so it's important that we, you know, keep enrollment levels close to what they have been previously and make an experience that students want to embrace. You know, I think students generally are pretty persistent, particularly those that have already invested a year or two here at CSU. They love the place. They want the experience. I've got two rising seniors in our household, and they can't wait to get back to campus. And they know that, you know, that'll look very different from the way it's looked in the past, but they want to be, you know, CSU students and have that final year. Here's a Ram. And part of that hopefully will be, you know, an intercollegiate athletic experience, because we have a lot of student fans that love what we do in Moby and at Canvas Stadium.
Mike?
Yeah, Joe, what happens when a student athlete is put in quarantine, and how are they tended to and cared for?
Is Lori on the call? She was going to try and join.
I am.
Lori, I'd love for you to handle that question for Mike.
Sure. Hi, Mike. So for the student athletes, and also any student on the CSU campus or in the community, we have a really contact tracing process. And as individuals are identified for needing to either self-isolate or quarantine, we have essentially a team that provides a variety of resources. So if they're, for example, students residing on campus, we have a process to be able to help those students transition from a residence hall space into a designated quarantine space. We also do meal deliveries right to the door. We help connect them with services such as the CSU Health Network for medical care, counseling services, and then student case management to, as we move into the fall semester, to help coordinate communication with their academic classes and ensure that they have the support and resources that they need. A pretty standard process that we've had in place, and we expect that will continue into the fall semester.
Lori, what's the difference between an athlete who's tested positive and somebody you think's been in contact but hasn't tested positive yet? How many days are they quarantined?
So if an individual has tested positive, the current recommendations for a known positive would be 10 days from the onset of symptoms, prior to when they would be released to come back. For a quarantined individual who close contact, meeting the definition from the CDC, those would be a 14-day quarantine period.
Thank you.
And Lori, I'm going to ask a question. What's the difference between quarantine and self-isolation? Is there a difference?
Well, as far as the need to remove yourself from settings, no. They're really the same thing. The difference is the fact that the isolated individual information that they're positive or presumed to be positive, where the quarantined individual would follow essentially the same protocols with not engaging in events and activities, minimizing contact with others, et cetera, because they have a potential to develop the virus, and we need to run out that period so that they're not potentially an asymptomatic spreader prior to development of symptoms.
Kevin?
I realize the focus might be on the here and now, but have there been any discussions with the football games you lost? Obviously, they were either end of contracts or start of contracts, but any discussions about maybe kind of making those up down the road?
CU's kind of settled. We've got a home and home calendared for 2023 and 2024. We've talked about another home and home series a little bit further out. And honestly, Kevin, the conversations, started a few times. I know there's a commitment on our part. I know there's a commitment on CU's part. I know there's date availability, but I don't think we put that to paper. I don't think that's in contract yet. I did get a call about 20 minutes in advance of the SEC's announcement from Vanderbilt, from one of their football operations people, just trying to give me advance notice. On that message, he'd mentioned that they'd be back in touch. Obviously that game was a cancellation by Vanderbilt, which was the front end of a home and home, so they'll be returning here next year. So we haven't entered into the conversation. Do we push that out, or do we just treat that as a cancellation unilaterally on their part, and they fulfill the contract? It was actually a 4-game contract, so we still have 3 games looking forward with Vanderbilt beyond the 2020 season. And then nothing, haven't made really any effort to calendar anything beyond. I think we're done through 2024. We need games in 25, 26 and beyond.
Last call. If we have any more questions for Joe or really even for Lori. I'm not seeing any hands go up, Joe, so I appreciate your time and willingness to meet with everyone today.
Absolutely. As you know, happy to be available, and I wish everyone good fortune and be well.